5 overlooked guest experience questions today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew. We are also joined today by my cold. So, my apologies if
welcome to all two of you.
if I cough or if I sniffle, I'm so sorry. It's just the nature of the beast today. So, today we're talking about when people come to your church, they're bringing more than just themselves. They're bringing some questions along with them. And I guess maybe let me take a step back. One of the reasons why we wanted to take some time today to start talking about guest experience is it's when this releases, it'll be February 12th, I think, is when this episode will go out. It's not too early to start thinking about Easter, AJ. And preparing for that, and sometimes making some of the adjustments we're going to be talking about in today's episode. You can't just flip a switch and change these things. It takes a little bit of time. So we wanted to talk about this so that you could be as Easter ready as possible in your guest experience. But also on that note, AJ, we have some Easter materials to help serve your church available inside the Healthy Churches Toolkit. So if you're already a subscriber, congratulations, like you're going to have access to all of that. I'm talking about Easter series that you can adapt on your own with discussion guides and printable materials and, a social media plan and the whole 9 yards. And all of that is available inside the toolkit. So as always, you can go to malfersgroup.com/toolkit and sign up for free. And we won't tell anybody if you just download all the stuff and then cancel.
You can sleep at night doing that. That's okay.
But you get access for 7 days for free. Again, when this releases on February 13th, which will be the day after this episode goes live, we're going to have a tour, so to speak, of that Easter hub with all of the materials, kind of reviewing what materials are in there and how to take advantage of them and how you could print them and modify them. And also a new AI tool. We have a new AI tool inside the toolkit that we're releasing to help you develop a guest follow-up sequence, email sequence. So there's lots of new stuff that's happening this week in the toolkit. So we thought we would shameless plug, talk about that, but also talk about how you can get your church Easter ready in your guest experience. So,
yeah,
you all of that is context.
healthychurchestoolkit.com and register.
That's true. Yeah. malfersgroup.com/toolkit or healthychurchestoolkit.com. All those things will get you where you need to go.
Yeah. And by the way, that, this thing that we're doing on Thursday, we do every month. So the Healthy Churches Toolkit gains a resource every month, and we do a live workshop. They're recorded also. You can go back to the archive and review those. But for subscribers, you can join us once a month because the toolkit grows every month, and we tell you about it and how it can be useful for your church.
Yes, indeed. All right. So these common questions that guests have, let's just walk through them.
All right. 5 overlooked guest experience questions. And we're starting off with the arrival and the question by a guest: where do I park and walk in? Where do I park and walk in? And sometimes
kind of a twofer here. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's not always clear. Maybe one might be clearer than the other, or both might be unclear. Scott, you and I have we have got a breadth of experience in how all of these things that we're talking about today are handled in churches, but making it clear, like this is the entrance. You might think some of this is ridiculous because you're picturing your church. Maybe your church has one entrance and one door, and you've got, 4 guest parking spots pretty close to the front somewhere. And you're like, what? This is simple stuff. But it's not. Everybody's church is a little bit different, and we've seen some really complicated scenarios. And the only way to make complicated scenarios easier is with good information and signage usually. And that's usually the tweak that needs to happen in those cases, is just put some signs out. And it doesn't even have to be permanent things. Sandwich boards put out, early Sunday morning by a volunteer just to direct guests, having some guest parking so that, they're not driving around making loops, trying to find a decent spot. Have some guest parking up front. But there's some strategy to that, Scott, when your guest parking is up front.
Yeah, let me like talk about this in a concrete user experience type way and why this is confusing. Because I know so many of you are listening to this and you're going, oh, okay, yeah, well, this one doesn't apply to me. We've got visitor parking and it's right up front. Okay, but I don't want you to think about up front. Here's what I want you to think about. When your people who are there every week, when they come, what door do they walk in? And why do they walk in that door? So it might be because, they walk in that door because the children's check-in is actually inside that door. Mm-hmm. So a regular attender doesn't walk into the main entrance. They walk into the side entrance because that's where children's check-in is. So that should lead you to ask yourself, if that's what a normal person does, because it's the most convenient and makes the most sense, why would I have a newcomer walk in the entrance that's the most confusing? They're going to have to walk through a maze to find the children's check-in or where the guest connection table is. So we think it's right up front. This is good parking. The good parking is not necessarily next to the main entrance. It's near the things that they need to know. Does that make sense, AJ?
It does. It does. Yeah.
So this is where the mistake that a lot of churches make is they go, we have guest parking, it's right up front. But then you walk in the main entrance, and now I'm even more confused. Like, I don't know. Where do I go from here?
Yeah, and perhaps the team members that then they come in contact with first aren't actually trained or equipped to direct somebody.
They didn't notice that you parked in the guest parking, so they don't know that you're new. They don't know that you don't know where to go.
I would say in scenarios like this, in which there's more than one entrance, and maybe there's a better entrance based on whether you have kids or not, have guest parking in both places. Then, and we're gonna talk about websites more at the end. But yeah, letting people know, like, if you're dropping off kids, this door over here is the best place to go in. If that's not a thing that, you as a visitor need or care about, then, that's not going to be as important.
Yeah, I'm going to give a positive shout. I've used them as a positive shout out on a lot of episodes, so I know they don't mind. But I worked with a church in North Carolina that this was a criticism that I had of theirs initially, was their guest parking was close to their main entrance, but their children's check-in was, it felt like a mile away. I mean, it couldn't have been further away from the main entrance. And I was like, how would I even know? And they're like, well, we walk people back there. I'm like, do you though? And they're like, man, sometimes we do. And they responded so well to that. They moved two things. They moved where the children's check-in was, and they moved the entrance where they were encouraging guests to walk into this sort of like entrance that's in between where the main lobby is and where the kids ministry area was. They realized we can direct guests to this point because they had a very small, it was like their old narthex, but it's perfect for encountering the newest of people. So they don't do their full guest connection stuff there, but they do children's check-in and, first time guests and all that. They're able to corral all of that right there. And they have very clear flags that tell you new here, children's check-in this way. And you can't miss it now. It's so obvious. And it's like perfection. And they manage that so well. And you all know who you are. And I know lots of you actually listen to this podcast, and actually when you're listening, how much that's impacted your church. I mean, they've grown a lot. And one keys to their success has been they've really optimized that first-time guest experience. It's spectacular.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love hearing those stories too about, just rethinking. You've got to sometimes you have to change your perspective and rethink things.
Well, and like you can't, like in their case, you can't help the fact that you have this older
Yeah,
building, and then you
right.
have this add-on, like, and the children's ministry is in the older building, and your nice, beautiful lobby is in the add-on. You can't help that that's the case, but you can optimize the entrance that makes the most sense for where children's check-in should be.
Yeah. Yep.
And you make do with it. Like you go, okay, well, wouldn't it be nice if the children's check-in was in the beautiful new lobby? Well, it's not. Like, and it can't be all the way over there because it doesn't make any sense for it to be there.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah.
And they've maximized what they have done, and it's worked really well for them.
Sometimes, I think the thought also is that these parking spots, they should be like closest to the door, and that's just and that's a nice convenience. Let's make our guests not have to walk very far, and that's cool. That's a nice sentiment. But sometimes, having them closer can also be a strategic location where it's more visible, so that a team member can actually see, okay, somebody just parked there. I don't need to wait for them to come in looking, with the deer in the headlights look. I can just anticipate they're going to have questions. I can welcome them as a guest. I've got pretty good evidence they're a guest because they park there. Every now and then we run into a church where the most entitled of members use the guest parking. But
yeah, that's right.
But you get to know them.
You should call them out. You should call them out. You should be like, you can't park
but,
there.
You can see. Maybe you can see from the door, or you got somebody, somebody working out in the parking lot. And we're like, all right, somebody just parked there. When this family or this person comes up, I can go, hey, I'm glad you came to visit. Where can I direct you? Are you just here for worship, or what questions can I answer? Use it to your advantage to welcome them as a guest.
You don't even have to have a parking team. You can just have a greeter at that, whatever that guest entrance is. Think of it as a guest entrance and not a primary entrance. Those might overlap. They might not.
Yeah.
And if you've got a greeter kind of stationed at the guest entrance and it's within, just eye shot of the guest parking, you should be able to notice who parks there.
Yeah. Yeah. And
keep up with, by the way, on that note, like about 3% of your parking should be dedicated to guests.
Yeah.
So you just do that math based on the size of your parking lot. If
you've never had a guest or it's been a really long time, give us a call. We would like to talk to you because we can help you with that. And you also mentioned, walking people, they might say, well, we walk people there. Actually, one of the earlier churches I ever worked with had that strategy in place, had that team in place, and they were utilizing students, like high school student age, because they had a ton. I think they might have only maybe they had 2 different parking lots, but they just had a ton of entrances, and they'd left them all open. And they had just team of high school students posted at those doors. Like 2 or 3 of them, like they literally were walking people. They're like, hey, welcome. Let me take you wherever you need to go. Let me escort you there. Then there were still somebody posted there until that one got back, and they had enough in that rotation. It worked great. Great way to engage students in hospitality ministry. So, there's some super creative ways to manage maybe bad design and things in your space.
Totally. All right. Number two,
we were kind of talking about this already, but the second question, what do I do with my kids? And this needs to be really clear because, in fact, hold on, let me back up a second here, Scott. Cause I just said the word because. Why is this? Because why? Because guests, have made a really important decision to visit your church today. And there's a lot of reasons that they made that decision. That decision might have happened a half hour ago, might have happened weeks ago, but they're there and they're new and they don't know what you know. And your job is to make it as easy and comfortable for them as possible, because this is assuming you want them to stay. You want them to become a part of your fellowship. You want them to get to know Jesus. And so there's a lot of big reasons and there's a lot of big things happening in that moment on a Sunday morning that could affect them positively or negatively. And so the big because here is that let's make guests feel welcome and let's help them focus as much on God as they can in that, 90 minutes or 120 minutes that they might be on your campus, and not be thinking about the things that the baggage is going on in their life, or the things that you've introduced them to that morning that might be stressing them, like this one. What do we do with my kids? And what's going to happen to my kids? I'm going to hand you my kids, you strangers. What exactly are you going to be doing with them for the next 75 minutes? And so, what do I do with my kids? Where do they go? How do I drop them off? How are you making me feel comfortable and confident that they're going to be well taken care of, that they're going to be safe, that it's going to be easy for me to get from wherever they are to where I'm going to be going and back? And even that both ways. I've dealt with some churches that have such complicated buildings that if you drop the kids off and they had somebody there to bring you to the sanctuary, I'm not sure I would find my way back the first time. So I mean, you've dropped them off now in a space and they're left with like, how do we get back there? And I know we made 4 rights. Wouldn't that have brought us back? Isn't that a circle? No, somehow we ended up in a different place. So there's just tons of questions out, and we just need to make sure that we're ahead of our guest every step of the way.
Yeah, I think again, this is another thing where there's just competency bias in a sense. Competency is probably not the right word, but just where you're so familiar with it.
Comfort bias, information bias. Yeah,
right. Where you go, okay, this is intuitive, and it's just maybe not intuitive. And so parents, there's 2 kinds of guests. There's the ones that show up really early, and there's the ones that show up, when the service has already started. And in any case, you've got a limited amount of time to check in a kid and all of this stuff. So if you can shorten that by having a planned visit, we'll talk more about website stuff, I guess, later, AJ, like you said. But have a plan your visit module on your website or a link on the website, and have that integrate with your church management software so you can already have the kids' information for the planners. That will help. It also gives you an ability, an advantage that you don't have when they just show up, but you can pre-communicate with them about where the check-in is and how the process works and how does checkout work and where's their classroom and what are they going to be learning and what are the safety protocols that you have in place. You don't need to send them. I went to a church one time that, as a visitor, and they gave us literally a plastic bag full of content. I think I counted something like 15 or 16 different packets that they gave us in the children's ministry of like how to be a parent, and also here's what our safety protocols are, and all this stuff. I was like, oh, this is overwhelming. So you don't need to do that. But parents want to know, are my kids going to have a good time? Are they going to be safe? How do I drop them off? How do I pick them up? And if you can get that information to them in advance, all the better. If you have to do it when they just first show up, have a good system for that. It is not uncommon for me to visit a church and I can find the check-in relatively well enough, easy enough, but it's just a kiosk, and everybody checks themselves in, which is fine for a regular attender, but when you're new, you don't know what you're doing. So you need a volunteer there who helps the people who aren't there every week to check in. Mm-hmm. And give them information and what is the process. Some churches, they have kids join in the service for part of the time and then they dismiss them halfway through for children's church. What's that look like? Because if you're sitting there with your kid and you're new and all these kids get up and they start walking out, like, was I supposed to do something? Was I supposed to fill something out? They're just getting up. Should my kid get up?
That's a good point, Scott. And we were just
talking about where are they going? What room are they going into?
Yeah,
where would I pick them up after church? Like, where would I even go? All of those things that's just normal for you, but it's not normal for a guest. So communicate.
I'm trying to think if I've worked with a church that did that, and what was the safety protocol? How do you
usually
manage?
They do? The ones that have safety protocols, what they do is they have you check in before the service.
so that your kid's already, they've got their,
so your kid is already checked in and they got their name tag,
their wristband or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they have volunteers who walk with the kids to wherever children's church is. And then after the service, you go and you check out your kid from children's church.
Yeah.
But so it's not like it's unsafe. It's perfectly safe.
That is a system that you got to understand. Yeah.
You'd have to know it. Yeah.
Man.
So,
yeah. All right. Our next guest experience question: where's the bathroom? And people kind of need to know that. So there's all kinds of needs out there, from changing a diaper to medical conditions and just the plain old being a human. So I guess the best way to handle this in most cases, just have some decent signs in the building. But you could, as a part of, you don't want to overwhelm with information like you just mentioned, Scott, in the packet or the bag that you got. But, if there is a really simple layout map that, is a part of a guest thing, like, here you go, Mark's where the bathroom, you can point out, look, bathroom's right here. Let's go through that.
Put a campus map on your website.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Be a good thing. I know that seems like a small thing, but a lot of churches, they were built, and I don't know who designed church buildings, 60 years ago, but no one seemed to care like where the bathroom was and if it made any sense. It's like some back hallway somewhere, and you're like, what are we doing here? Yeah.
And it's the doors on either, it's the front of the sanctuary, and there's a door on the right, there's a door on the left, and everybody's going to see who goes in and out of those. It's going to be a complete distraction, but there's nothing you can do about it at this point. Without a major renovation. So
yeah. I worked
Don't
at the church.
do it like an airplane lavatory, though, where after you go through that door, a light comes on that says occupied.
It's occupied. Yeah. I worked with a church a couple years ago that it's not their fault. I mean, just they had their sanctuary worship space, and it did not have a bathroom in it. It was pretty old. They had a fellowship hall that was adjacent to it that had the bathroom was in the fellowship hall. This is a small church, and but the problem was, if you needed the handicap ramp, if you couldn't do stairs for whatever reason, the only way for you to access the bathroom would be to go out the main entrance of the worship center to go to use that ramp, and then use the ramp into, or I guess no, the fellowship hall was on ground level, so you had to go down the ramp outside and then because the fellowship hall and the main building were connected, but they were connected by a set of stairs. So if you are in a wheelchair and you needed to use the restroom, it really was not simple.
Yeah.
Not an easy process. And if you were a guest, you really wouldn't know. You would probably be rolling around like, where's there a bathroom? And like, actually, you got to go outside.
Yeah.
In the snow or in the rain or in the or in the 90, whatever the weather is.
I hadn't thought of that yet. So, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, to not only think about this from, the perspective of able-bodied people, but disabled as well, on how they're going to move around your campus and facilities. So, yeah.
So, I mean, to their credit, they knew it was a problem, and they were actually getting bids to spend literally tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to do a small addition to their facility that would include restrooms. So, I mean, it wasn't their heart for that to be the situation. It was sort of the thing that just, the sanctuary space was very old.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing they could do about it. It's not their fault. So I'm not criticizing them in any way, but that's information that you need to know if you're a guest there. Like, how do I get to where the restroom is?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah. I mean, we're not trying to bring down, or give a hard time to any churches that have just, you have to deal with some challenging facilities. The older your building probably is, the more difficult it also is.
That's right. It's not, there's no blame. It's just, you have to communicate what that is. Can I make one other note on bathrooms before I move on? I'm not saying it's the most important thing in the world. Like, most bathrooms are just utilitarian, Like it serves its purpose and it's fine. And most bathrooms that I go into in churches are clean. Like I rarely walk into a church bathroom that is, in rough shape. But one pet peeve that I have about bathrooms in churches, and then another tip on how to make it even better. So my pet peeve on bathrooms is a lot of you I know have septic tank situations. And so you need to communicate what can and cannot be flushed, or warnings about that. But just like be mindful of how you formulate those signs and what they look like.
Yeah.
I don't have any one church in mind. I have several churches in mind where I've seen these signs, and they're almost like downright aggressive. I guess because someone at some point flushed something that they shouldn't, and it caused a lot of trouble. And I've seen some of these signs that are like, "Don't you dare!" I mean, they basically read as, "Don't you dare flush anything other than toilet paper down the toilet," and it's all in like bright, cute. They're laminating the thing as angry signs in red. Like, it just, you can communicate the information, but it doesn't have to be so like aggressive. Maybe. Do you know what I'm talking about? Am I alone in this, or am I the only one that's like seen some pretty angry signage in the bathroom?
We've seen some crazy signs throughout churches for sure. Yeah, that definitely did not have any oversight. Yeah.
So that's a pet peeve. Just, you can just say, please only flush toilet paper in the facilities or something like that. I mean, it doesn't have to be everyone. We know all the things that aren't included. You don't need to put in clip art that shows us the things that we shouldn't put in the toilet. Like, we got it. And someone who's going to flush other things is going to do it whether there's that, clip art or not. Like they weren't going to read your sign.
Yeah. For some reason, I don't know why they had a children's toy in the bathroom with them and decided to flush that, but yeah.
Exactly.
They were going to do that anyway.
So number 2, real quick, my tip. If you go above and beyond in a bathroom, that counts for something. Like, you get like good soap, not just the dial, but I mean, like you go for the slightly better smelling soap.
Mm-hmm.
You plug in one of those things that makes the bathroom like not the Glade plug-in that's burns your nose, but like the something in there that really elevates
the. Since you're opening up this line of discussion, I'm telling you, if you're you can blame it on your septic system that you have to have single-ply toilet paper. But I'm telling you, if you need to have the septic tank cleaned out 3 times a year instead of once and have some decent toilet paper, that needs to be in the budget. Because I tell you what, nothing is going to make me more aggressive in how much toilet paper I'm going to have to use than if it's single-ply. And
that's true. Yeah, that's a good point. You would use less if it was better quality.
Yes, give the people some decent. No offense, but if you see Scott on the shelf, it's
you're talking not me.
Scott toilet paper.
Okay, I'm
sorry
why am I sitting on a shelf.
I'm sorry that the worst toilet paper shares a name with you, my friend.
Yeah,
but
that's okay.
Yeah. When the shelf, your toilet paper storage shelf is right there next to the sink, and I'm like, you just told me what brand I'm dealing with.
Yeah,
here.
I mean that's what I'm talking about. It's those little things where you're like, I mean, most of you guys, some of you are maybe have really large facilities in your. You got to buy a lot of toilet paper, but for a lot of you, you're not. You've got a couple of bathrooms, and what's the delta on that between the single ply commercial stuff and the good stuff? Not
and
that
who's
much.
Not using twice as much single ply?
I know.
I mean, seriously.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just telling you, like these little things people do notice, and they're like, oh man. Good toilet paper.
Yeah.
I was at a retreat center. I was working with a church just last week in Texas, and they had their meetings offsite rather than at their church. And this particular center where we were at had this incredible bathroom. Like, it was immaculate, and it smelled incredible. It was beautiful. And they had this was an interesting touch. They had the hand towels that they had washed, like washcloths, like a bunch of them, just white ones that they had laundered and folded and had them piled up, and use that instead of paper towels. I'm not recommending that every church do that. That would kind of probably be more laundry and work than anyone would want to do. But my point is, like, I'm still thinking about that bathroom. Like, and I know that that's stupid, but when you take care in small things like that, this is the broader point. Yeah. When you take care in small things like that, it communicates something about your church. It's a thing you didn't have to do, that you chose to do, and it says something about who you are.
Yeah,
that's the point.
Positively and negatively. People will talk about bathrooms. A husband and wife, when they leave church, if one of them had to use a facility, that's probably going to be part of the conversation. I went in the bathroom and you wouldn't believe. Or I went in the bathroom and you would not believe.
You wouldn't believe. Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. I also remember, Dr. Malfers said this. This is just something that has stuck with me from, our early days, Scott. He used to say that in regards to bathrooms, that old can be confused with dirty. You might have a really clean bathroom, but if it's kind of broken down, things are looking worn, it gives the impression of not being clean. And so now we're talking money, and sometimes a lot of money to renovate bathrooms. And I know that's not feasible for everybody, but that's something to keep in mind. The bathroom shouldn't be like the lowest priority of what we fund. So,
but you could do, there's all kinds of things you can do that are relatively inexpensive, like without changing out major fixtures or ripping out tile, like change the mirror out, put in the better soap. Like there are all kinds of things that you can do to spruce up a bathroom. And again, we've talked about the bathroom way too much, but it's the little things that go a long way. That's the point.
When you're on your third style of soap dispenser and all of the holes in the wall are there from the previous iterations, let's just patch that up. Let's patch it up.
Or you still have the soap dispenser on the wall, but then you have the pump.
The pump. You're like, you know what? Forget it. Let's just buy it at Costco.
Then everyone's going to the thing on the wall and they're like, oh no, there's nothing in that. Oh, I gotta get this.
Along with the broken automatic paper dispenser. Yeah.
That's right.
Have we been around? Is this a sore spot, Scott? It's definitely
been in a lot of bathrooms, a lot of church bathrooms.
All right, our fourth guest experience question. This is a fun one. Is coffee allowed in here? What do I do with my coffee? What do I do with my drink? What do I do with my 96-ounce Yeti that for some reason I'm carrying in a backpack? What's the policy here? We did an episode on this, Scott, back 215. So malforsgroup.com/215 if you want to go back and read about us talking about coffee in the sanctuary. But make this clear, though. Definitely
because I think the impetus for that was didn't someone on the internet like
John Piper? John Piper.
Oh, it was John Piper. He was like, we shouldn't have coffee.
Yeah,
and we debated whether or not he was right or wrong. It was an interesting conversation. A long one, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, people have different views on that for sure. And we're not telling you one that's right or wrong, but try to make it somewhat obvious, if there's a sign that says, no food or drink in the sanctuary, make it big enough. People like to style, let's make a sign that blends in with the wallpaper. Well, no, let's make a sign that people can actually read, because the last thing you want is somebody not to know and then get called out for it, by an usher or a member. And so whatever you want, just make it pretty clear so that people don't get embarrassed, or
phrase it in the positive, like rather than no coffee in the sanctuary, say water only, please, or something like that. So you can you just be thoughtful about how you phrase things, but be clear about it. I was at a church a few weeks ago, and I had a cup of coffee from the hotel, and as I pulled into the parking lot, I was like, I just doubted. I was like, I don't know. This isn't their fault, because, they couldn't pre-tell me. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not blaming them, but I did have
given no coffee vibes.
Well, no, not necessarily. No, not at all. But I was just like, I don't want to, because it was pretty full. It was almost entirely full, and I thought, I don't want to put a full cup of coffee in one of their trash cans. And on the
nice
off chance, and on the off chance that they don't want it in the sanctuary, I don't want to have to throw it away in there. So
you might not be able to find a bathroom to pour it out. So
I was just like, well, whatever, I'm not gonna worry about it. Turns out it would have been fine to bring it in. And, in fact, they had coffee. So I got another cup of coffee from their coffee stash, but, I wasn't sure. So just make sure you're clear on that. I would love for us to spend a couple minutes here, since I'm using the excuse of, is coffee allowed, to maybe spend a couple minutes talking about some best practices around coffee. So, and how to leverage that coffee experience.
Yeah, good convo.
So I want to actually ask you, you've had this experience, I think, more than I have at this point, but we've worked with a number of international churches. So these are English-speaking churches in outside the United States. And a lot of them, a key feature of their experience, I'm not making a universal statement, but this is common, is for them to have like a coffee time.
Fellowship. I mean, they consider
coffee
it
fellowship.
an intentional fellowship time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the culture is different, obviously, and the culture of these churches are different. And, the ones we've worked with have been not exclusively in Europe, but largely in Europe. So, I mean, the culture is different. So I'm recognizing that. But there are some things I think that we've noticed that work really well that I think could apply in a North American context. So I'm curious, what have you observed from that, and what could we learn from that?
Well, I mean, yeah, functionally, sometimes there's not necessarily a lot of difference. I mean, okay, there's a time and a place, and there's coffee available there, and maybe there's donuts or some other food or snacks, cookies, whatever it might be. So a lot of churches do that. But I think the difference is how it's communicated, and how the purpose of it is communicated, and then how maybe staff and volunteers interact with people in that space, leading then over time to a culture difference in which how everybody interacts with people in that space. So, I mean, that's not like anything real specific there for you, Scott. So, I mean, some examples of some of these churches. A lot of times it happens after church. It's not necessarily a before church. There might be some refreshments available before church, but their greater area of intentionality is after church. Mm-hmm. And it is a no need to rush out of here atmosphere. And, it's just a pretty good spread of stuff put out. There's plenty of cups. There's plenty of coffee. It's not like everybody has to get in line for like one carafe of coffee. Right. It's all over, so that, you're not waiting, 10 minutes behind a dozen people to make coffee. So, I mean, that helps. Let's get our beverage quickly. Let's get our snack, and then be able to mingle and have time. I went to a church that they would put up stand-up tables. They did it outside, weather permitting. And they had tables. There wasn't a lot of seating necessarily, but stand-up tables that people could gather around. But yeah, it's an intentional time for people just to relax, just hang out. I mean, we've been to church. We've got things to talk about. We all just had like a common experience together. And so in addition to, what's going on in our lives, that we can have conversations about some of the most fun time, that I've had in those environments.
I worked with a church in California a number of years ago that had an intentional coffee time like that. And they had a really good coffee and great coffee ministry. But one of the things that they did, since they were in Southern California and could get away with it, 99 out of 100 days, is they would do their coffee ministry outside as well. And they tried to position it near the sidewalk, because down there in Southern California, there's a lot of people that most people are not going to church. So they tried to actually make that coffee ministry not only fellowship, but also a little bit of an evangelistic focus, because they made it open to anybody who was walking. Where their church was on like near a main street. So lots of foot traffic just from the community. They were near a park, so people walking their dogs and things on a Sunday morning. And that was pretty cool, just to, the church people were interacting with guests and one another, but also passersby saw it, and the coffee and refreshments were very clearly like open to anyone being able to come up and enjoy it. Not even that Sunday that I was there, I saw 2 or 3 people just walking by, come and get a cup of coffee. And so I was impressed, and maybe just challenging you. That might not be your context. Might not be right on a sidewalk where that would make any sense, or the weather would be too poor or whatever. But don't just shove your coffee back in a corner somewhere where it's an amenity. Like, if you're going to do this, bring it out. Like, use it as a tool for edification and for, maybe even evangelism.
Yeah. And don't buy the coffee equivalent of single-ply toilet paper. So
yeah, have good coffee. Yeah, that's right.
I've, I went to a church, been to a church that they had a great coffee setup like before the service started. I was like, oh, it's really nice. A lot of coffee stations, donuts, and all that stuff came out of the service. This is like a second service, and it was gone. Like, the elves came in during church service and just put it away. Every
Like,
volunteer
go
was
home, get
gone.
out.
I mean, nothing but, a crumb. Is like how the Grinch stole Christmas. There's not even a crumb left for a mouse. And it was like, oh, wow.
You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, kind of a thing.
It was a little shocking. Like, dang, they really want you to leave at this point. So, consider these things. What does it look like? What's the vibe we're putting out? What's the,
What does it communicate?
Yeah.
All right, last one.
Last question from guest experience. What do I do with the communion elements? So this is turning into a long episode. We've got you start talking about guest experience, you and I have a lot of opinions on things, but
Lots of feelings.
Communion elements. This is another one, especially, well, you know what? I was going to say, especially non-believers. That's important. It's equally as important to believers, people that have come from another church or had like a childhood experience. Maybe, they've been out of church for a long time and they're trying a different denomination. Just make this stuff clear, because this can be really nerve-wracking, I think, when you don't know what's happening here.
It certainly takes you out of the moment. Like, you're not reflecting on
That's a
communion.
good point. Yeah.
You're thinking about doing it wrong.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. If you're like everybody goes up kind of thing, and you're sitting in the middle or the back, you're like looking up, what exactly are they doing? I can't tell, they're blocking my view. I don't know what they're doing. Are they dipping? Are they, are we sharing a cup?
What's the deal? Yeah. And are we taking both elements at the same time? Are we taking them as a group all together? Am I supposed to hold on to it? Are we doing it on our own time? Is this open to any believer, or is it only for your membership? All of those things, it doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't need to be a bunch of instructions, but just have the instructions. I attend a church where we take communion every Sunday, which I absolutely love that. But I think a tendency, in our tradition, is to forget that there are people there each week who don't know what the routine is. And so if you're like our church, it's all the more important to just have that awareness and go, okay, here are the instructions, but that's true. Even if your church takes it once a month or once a quarter, be sure you give clear instruction. It's just one of those things that's easy to forget, to get it lost in the mix. So just a reminder that guests, if there's going to be communion, and it's a guest who is a believer, they maybe will know that they'll know the deal a little bit. But if they're not a believer, all the more reason to be clear with them that this is only open to believers, because you don't want them, drinking and eating judgment on their own head, as the scripture says. Not that there isn't grace for that mistake, but you're not serving them well. You're not serving a non-believing guest well by allowing them to take communion when they're not in communion. So,
maybe even give them something an alternative, suggestion for like use this time, in contemplation or prayer, or read over the material that we gave you when you came in. There's a paper in there. We'd love for you to review that, and hear about what a relationship with Christ looks like. Give them something to do besides like just stay there.
Yeah, if you've got guests, if you are able to give something to guests when they walk in, and you do take communion every week like we do, or it happens to be a communion Sunday, having instructions about communion even just in there would be good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Okay, hey, you know what? A lot of this stuff that we've talked about today can be handled on your church's website. Sounds like I'm about to go into an ad for like a church website company, but no.
Which we don't know. There is no ad here.
No, there's no
The ad is go to healthychurchestoolkit.com or to malforsgroup.com/toolkit.
Yeah.
Take advantage of the Easter stuff. That's the ad.
That's the only pitch today. But, give your website another look, because a lot of these things can be handled there. And everything that we talked about today, it can be handled by good signs, good printed information, and good verbal communication. And the common denominator is the word communication. Everything that we talked about just needs to be communicated in one form or another. Intentional. Absolutely.
I think that's the big thing, is like, it's just so easy to get stuck in that comfort and assuming, remember every Sunday is someone's first Sunday. It's new. It's the first time for somebody every time. And I know some of you are thinking, well, that's not true for our church. Like, cause we're small and we don't have guests. Well, start acting like you're going to have a guest this Sunday and see how that changes. I've had more than one church I've worked with. We've probably talked about this before, AJ, on the podcast. I'm not saying if you build it, they will come. I'm not saying that. But it is a little bit surprising that when you start preparing for guests, how the Lord brings them. So
I give the same advice every single time a church is like, oh gosh, I don't know, we had like 5 guests last year. It's been months since we've had a guest. I'm like, you need to start pretending like there's a guest here this Sunday. So totally agree with that.
And it's the Lord. It's not magic, but I do think the Lord honors that. And you'd be surprised when you start getting ready for the guests, they start coming.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, take some time, have a fresh look at your facilities, at your processes, at your signage, everything, and just be guest ready and take these things into account. It's a worthwhile investment, and it might lead to some really great discussions and some really positive changes in your church.
Yeah, and don't wait till April 1st to start working on this. You know what I'm saying? That's why we're talking about it now.
Yeah.
Some of this might take a little bit. If you're going to change some signs, it takes time to design them and to order them. And you know what I mean? Take some time out of your week this week to do a bit of an audit, do a little bit of a walk around. Are we ready?
There you go. This has been episode 277 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. Today's show notes are at malforsgroup.com/277. The video version of this will be up on the YouTube channel right now as you're hearing this. Comment over there some of the best examples or worst examples that you may have experienced or that your church has in any of these areas.
We want to know about your bathroom. We want to know, drop in the comments how many ply your toilet paper is.
Informal poll. All right. Thanks for being with us, everybody. Be sure to go to malforsgroup.com/toolkit or healthychurchestoolkit.com and get registered for your free account now and begin enjoying and using all those resources. They're there for you. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.